Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take your stack of research, the articles, the statistics, the historical documents, and turn it into a streamlined, high-definition understanding of a single topic.
Today, we are pointing the spotlight squarely at the American Midwest, and we're zeroing in on a state whose identity is, well, it's often simplified down to just one crop, corn.
Right. And our mission, which you, the listener, requested, is to get a fast but genuinely thorough understanding of the state of Iowa.
And we are going to go so much further than the stereotype.
Oh, way beyond the silo. We're moving into its deep geology, some surprisingly dynamic demographics, a massive technological transformation.
And honestly, a wildly surprising legacy in civil rights that predates the rest of the country by decades in some cases.
Exactly. So what truly makes the Hawkeye State tick? We're about to find out, and the sources you provided paint this picture of a place defined by constant, almost dramatic tension between its history and its innovation.
It's a great way to put it. And to set the baseline, Iowa's core identity is really captured in its nickname, the Hawkeye State, which dates back to the 1830s.
And its motto. I think the motto is incredibly compelling.
It is. Our liberties we prize and our rights we will maintain. This commitment to individual liberty, as we're definitely going to see, is a real through line in its history.
Geographically, too, Iowa is immediately distinctive. Just looking at it on a map, the entire east-west expanse is an anomaly.
It really is. The foundation of the state is the Mississippi River on the east.
And the Missouri and Big Sioux Rivers defining that entire western boundary.
Exactly. Being bordered almost entirely by these two massive, historically vital waterways fundamentally shaped everything. Its settlement, its commerce, even its soil quality.
And while that foundation was, absolutely agricultural, the modern reality is that Iowa's economy has undergone this massive diversification.
A huge pivot into advanced manufacturing, biotech, and, you could argue, the most successful statewide green energy initiative in the entire country.
It's a powerhouse. Before we get to the wind turbines and the massive data centers, let's start with a foundational detail that connects the state to a deep, often forgotten history.
What's that?
Did you know that Iowa's state flag is actually patterned after the flag of France?
It's a stunning starting point, isn't it? That single visual detail immediately forces you to look beyond the American Midwest and acknowledge its origin as a part of French Louisiana.
Which, of course, dictates where our deep dive must begin.
In the era of indigenous populations and shifting colonial claims.
Okay, let's unpack this history. We have to start with the name itself, Iowa. It's not a settler name.
No, it's derived directly from the Iowa River, which in turn is named after the indigenous Iowa people. They were a Chouer-speaking Siouan nation.
So this deep dive begins really over 13,000 years ago.
Correct. When the earliest indigenous peoples arrived, over 13 millennia ago, the landscape was post-glacial. It was a very different place.
Colder, I imagine. Sparsely vegetated.
Exactly. They began as highly mobile hunter-gatherers, but their relationship with the land transformed fundamentally over thousands of years. It moved through these distinct cultural periods before European contact, changed everything.
So if we look at that long arc of history, how did they transition from these highly mobile groups to more settled populations?
It happened slowly. It really mirrored adaptation all across the central continent. We first have to look at the long Archaic period, which spans from about 10,500 to 2,800 years ago.
So we're talking about a period of almost 8,000 years.
A massive stretch of time. And this wasn't a quick change. It was an era of profound adaptation. People learned to master the specific local ecosystems of Iowa, utilizing local plant and animal resources with incredible efficiency.
And that successful adaptation, coupled with, I assume, population expansion.
Right. It eventually facilitated a slow regional shift toward more sedentary or at least semi-permanent living. They were still moving, but less frequently and over smaller areas.
And the real game changer seems to have been the start of the late prehistoric period.
Absolutely. This starts around 8,900. This is the moment when maize cultivation becomes widespread and, crucially, reliable.
And that massive reliance on agriculture, it didn't just change diets.
Oh, it changed everything. It fueled a social flourishing. It allowed for the energy surplus and the manpower necessary to form more nucleated settlements, larger fixed villages.
Suggesting increasing social complexity, organized community life.
Precisely. This was really the peak of many of those regional cultures. You see more complex earthworks, more trade, a more settled way of life.
But then the sources mention the proto-historic period, and that sounds like a time of catastrophic change.
It was. It was an era of immense, often brutal volatility. This is the time when European trade goods, moving through proxy tribes, began to arrive in the region.
So not the Europeans themselves, just their goods.
At first, yes. But more devastatingly, European diseases, smallpox, measles, influenza, things for which indigenous populations had no immunity, also arrived. And they moved far faster than the settlers themselves.
And the source material notes this caused just dramatic population shifts.
Massive death rates and overwhelming social and economic upheaval. Entire villages were wiped out. Social structures collapsed. It was a cataclysm.
So which indigenous nations were thriving in the region at this point, before formal colonization really began?
There were numerous tribes present, and they were active traders. You had the Dakota, the Ho-Chunk, the Iowa, the Yoto.
And later rivals, right? Groups displaced from the east.
Yes, like the Illinois, the Meskwaki, the Omaha, and the Sauk. Their settled lives were just profoundly disrupted by disease and geopolitical maneuvering, even before formal American settlement began.
Okay, so the French claim. The fact that the state flag has that tricolor pattern suddenly makes perfect sense because this land was initially French Louisiana.
It was. The first known European explorers to document the land that would become Iowa were Jacques Marquette and Louis Joliet, traveling down the Mississippi River in 1673.
And they documented those indigenous villages.
And effectively claimed the entire territory for the French crown. But this is where the colonial shell game really begins.
Right before France lost the French and Indian War, they did what?
They transferred ownership to their ally Spain in 1763, so overnight it becomes Spanish Louisiana.
How much control did Spain actually exercise over this massive tract of land, though?
Very little, truthfully. They exercised a very loose administrative control. Primarily, they just granted trading licenses.
So the real power on the ground often remained with
French and British traders. They were the ones who were keenly interested in extracting lead and furs from the indigenous peoples. The focus was always extraction, never mass settlement.
And this brings us to one of the most famous early figures in Iowa history, Julien Dubuque.
Dubuque was one of the most prominent of these early traders. He ran a significant and very lucrative lead mining operation from 1785 to 1810 in the area that now bears his name.
But this operation was only possible because he had the cooperation of the local indigenous tribes. Right.
Absolutely. Primarily the Sauk and Meskwaki. They effectively controlled all trade and land access along the upper Mississippi. His success depended entirely on their consent.
This relatively stable extraction economy was short-lived, however.
Very short-lived, because Napoleon Bonaparte reclaimed Louisiana from Spain in 1800.
He basically just took it back.
He did, only to turn around and sell it to the United States 3 years later in the Louisiana Purchase of 1803.
And this single transaction, which was dictated thousands of miles away,
fundamentally set the stage for all future conflict and the entire history of the state. It changed everything for the people living there.
So with the Louisiana Purchase, Iowa falls into what was called the District of Louisiana, and the U.S. immediately tried to assert control.
Right, but the process was anything but smooth. They sent Zebulon Pike to map the area in 1805. The first real military foothold came with the construction of Fort Madison in 1808.
And that's when the instability really ramped up.
It did, driven by the U.S. desire to dominate the upper Mississippi trade and really to deter British influence, which was still very strong among the tribes.
But Fort Madison, I read, was a deeply flawed strategic disaster almost from day one.
It was. How so? The source material indicates it was just poorly designed. It was built on a vulnerable site, too close to the river, with hills behind it.
And crucially, it was built on land that many indigenous nations, particularly the Sauk and Meskwaki, vehemently disputed.
They did. This resentment, combined with the instability of the War of 1812, led many of those indigenous groups to ally with the British.
And the fort was besieged and defeated.
Defeated in 1813 by British-supported indigenous forces, and the famous Sauk leader, Black Hawk, personally participated in that successful siege. The U.S. garrison had to burn it to the ground to escape.
Wow. That defeat must have shaken the U.S. strategy considerably.
It forced a total rethink. Their post-war strategy was to reestablish control not with one vulnerable outpost, but with a chain of better-positioned forts designed to project power.
Like Fort Armstrong, Fort Snelling in Minnesota,
and Fort Atkinson in Nebraska. The larger, overarching strategy was clear. Encourage rapid American settlement on the east side of the Mississippi and push indigenous nations westward, paving the way for removal.
And this ushered in the painful era of forced land sales, which all culminated in the Black Hawk War.
That war in 1832 was the trigger for the final major land grabs, and it stemmed from a disputed 1804 treaty between the Sauk leader Quashquame and William Henry Harrison.
A treaty which many Sauk leaders, including Black Hawk, viewed as completely invalid.
They did, because Quashquame lacked the authority to sell the land. He wasn't authorized by the tribal council.
But the U.S. government upheld it anyway.
They did, and the consequences were brutal. The Sauk and Meskwaki were forced to sell massive tracts of land in the Mississippi Valley, the famous Black Hawk Purchase Treaty of 1832.
And most were moved to reservations, primarily in Kansas.
Yes, and the Ho-Chunk and Dakota nations were systematically forced out over the next 26 years. It's a devastating story of removal.
It is. But you mentioned a truly unique twist regarding the Meskwaki people that challenges this entire narrative of Indian removal.
This is one of the most significant and surprising details in Iowa's history. While many Meskwakis were forcibly removed to Kansas, a persistent group eventually returned to Iowa and began settling near what is now Tama.
They just came back on their own.
They did, and what makes this so unique is what happened next. In 1856, the Iowa legislature, not the federal government, passed an act allowing the Meskwaki to purchase the land they were living on.
Wait, a state legislature enabled an indigenous tribe to purchase their own land back, effectively reversing the federal policy of forced reservations.
That is precisely the significance. It stands in stark contrast to the federal government's policy of forcing tribes onto distant, often inhospitable reservations.
So this act created the Meskwaki settlement,
which remains today as the only federally recognized tribal land within Iowa's borders, purchased by the tribe itself. It speaks volumes about the state's very early, very complicated relationship with land ownership and sovereignty.
a theme we'll see repeated in the civil rights context.
Absolutely.
So with the land now secured for American settlement following those purchase treaties, the first official American settlers arrived in June 1833.
Primarily from Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York. They were founding cities like Dubuque and Bellevue almost immediately, and the Iowa Territory was established just a few years later in 1838.
The settlement was swift and organized then.
Incredibly swift. The population was booming, and the clamor for statehood was immediate. Iowa became the 29th state on December 28, 1846.
And following statehood, the government immediately launched these organized, aggressive campaigns to attract new settlers and investors.
Yes, promoting the rich, deep farmlands, and what they promised was a free and open society.
And that concept of a free society carried incredible weight just 15 years later when the Civil War began.
It did, and it really defined Iowa's identity in that conflict. Iowa was fiercely loyal to the Union, voting overwhelmingly for Abraham Lincoln.
But we have to note there was a small, vocal, anti-war Copperhead movement.
There was, partially fueled by wartime crop price fluctuations and a general distrust of federal power in some corners. But it was a fringe phenomenon. The overwhelming sentiment was abolitionist and pro-union.
And the state's contribution to the Union cause is almost unbelievable, especially considering how young the state was.
This is a core part of Iowa's national narrative. Iowa contributed proportionately more soldiers to the Union cause than any other state, north or south.
Let's put that into perspective.
Okay, so out of a population of 675,000 in 1860, over 75,000 men volunteered.
That's more than 10% of the entire population.
It is. And think of the societal cost. Over 1/6 of those volunteers were killed before the Confederates surrendered at Appomattox. The impact of that loss on a young state is just, well, it's impossible to overstate.
And what about the fighting itself? Did any major battles happen on Iowa soil?
Mercifully, no major battles. The closest the state came to the violence was in 1861, when shots from the Battle of Athens, Missouri, landed just across the Des Moines River in Croton, Iowa.
So no invasions or occupations?
None. But Iowa's contribution was through manpower and leadership. It produced 4 major generals, including Grenville Dodge, who became famous for his role in the Transcontinental Railroad.
And 27 Iowans were awarded the Medal of Honor,
which was a brand new award established during the conflict. It was a testament to their bravery.
So Iowa transitioned from a frontier territory, still destabilized by conflict in the 1830s, to this pillar of the Union effort in less than 30 years.
An incredible transformation. And that successful effort set the stage for a massive post-war population boom. The population nearly tripled between 1860 and 1890.
And that scale of rapid settlement must have fundamentally changed the environment almost overnight.
That's a perfect pivot. The massive population influx you just mentioned directly translates to the geographic and environmental discussion we're about to have.
Okay, so let's anchor ourselves geographically. We already mentioned the unique river boundaries.
Right. Again, Iowa is the only state whose east and west borders are formed almost entirely by rivers, the Mississippi and the Missouri Big Sioux. It's defined by water.
And just a quick administrative fun fact for the listener.
Iowa has 99 counties, but 100 county seats.
Why is that?
Because Lee County, down in the southeast corner, is home to both Fort Madison and Keokuk, and both of them serve as county seats. It's a historical quirk.
But what truly surprises people, I think, is the terrain itself. It's not just flat farmland.
Not at all. And we have to focus on the two landforms that completely shatter that flat state stereotype. First, the incredibly dramatic Loess Hills along the western border.
I've seen pictures. They look spectacular.
They are a spectacular geological anomaly. They're composed of this incredibly thick, wind-deposited silt, or loess.
So wait, what is Loess exactly?
It's basically rock that was ground into a fine powder by glaciers. After the glaciers retreated, this powder was left behind in the river valleys, and the prevailing westerly winds blew it up into these massive dunes.
So the wind built these hills.
Essentially, yes. Some of these deposits are several hundred feet deep, creating this distinctive, steep, and dramatic topography that runs parallel to the Missouri River.
It's an unusual formation, I understand, because locust tends to erode vertically.
Right, which creates these sharp ridgelines that are incredibly fragile. It's a globally rare landscape, with the only comparable formations being in China.
And then on the other side of the state, you have the driftless area in the northeast.
Think of the driftless area as a rocky island in a sea of ice. It's this spectacular region along the upper Mississippi with steep hills, deep river valleys, and sheer bluffs that appear rugged and almost mountainous.
And what makes it driftless?
It's that this specific pocket of land was actually bypassed by the massive continental glaciers that flattened and reshaped the rest of Iowa.
So the glaciers just went around it.
They did, and this bypassing left behind this ancient, rugged, unglaciated landscape with features that are completely different from the rolling fields to the west and south.
The geology itself also tells this massive story about the state's formation, with the bedrock decreasing in age as you move west.
It's a literal timeline written in stone. The bedrock age decreases systematically from east to west. So in the east, along the Mississippi, you find ancient Cambrian bedrock from about 500 million years ago.
And in the west.
You encounter much younger Cretaceous bedrock, around 74 million years old. But if you dig even deeper into the Precambrian rocks exposed in the northwest,
The oldest dated bedrock in the state.
the Otter Creek Layered Mafic Complex, it clocks in at an astonishing 2.9 billion years old.
2.9 billion. So you are literally walking on billions of years of geological history, from the formation of continental crust to the age of the dinosaurs, all within the borders of Iowa.
It's an incredible geological cross-section of the continent.
Okay, let's return to that population boom we discussed after the Civil War. When settlers arrived, Iowa was defined by tallgrass prairie and savanna, with forests and wetlands in the river valleys.
That's right. It was a mosaic of different ecosystems.
But that huge influx of people looking to farm fundamentally changed the land, and the source material contains some frankly sobering facts about the environmental loss.
These facts are absolutely critical for understanding modern Iowa's identity and its current environmental struggles. The intensive cultivation required by mass agriculture resulted in one of the most drastic transformations of any state.
So how much of the original landscape is left?
Less than 1% of the original tallgrass prairie remains intact.
1%.
Less than 1%. And perhaps even more devastatingly, approximately 95% of the original wetlands have been drained.
95%. That has huge implications for water quality, flood control, and biodiversity.
It does. It fundamentally alters the natural water filtering and retention systems of the landscape.
And this concentration of land into private, cultivated farmland means that, as of 2005, Iowa ranked 49th among U.S. states in public land holdings.
The vast majority of the state is devoted to agricultural production, and that inevitably leads to modern environmental pressures.
And the primary pressure today seems to stem from high-density livestock farming. We've seen this statistic, but it demands repeating. Hogs outnumber Iowans 7-1.
Over 22.6 million hogs were counted in 2018. It is a stunning density, driven by massive confined animal feeding operations, or CAFOs.
And while that's economically lucrative, this explosion of large-scale livestock facilities requires complex manure management.
It does. And this has directly led to increased rural water contamination from nitrates and phosphorus, and a measurable decline in air quality in surrounding areas.
So does that high-density ratio mean that air quality issues and water runoff from fertilizer and pesticides are just inevitable challenges?
There are massive challenges. Fertilizer and pesticide runoff contribute heavily to nutrient loading in the Mississippi River Basin, which impacts the Gulf of Mexico dead zone.
And locally.
Locally, the intensive use of water, combined with reduced natural infiltration because the wetlands are gone, is diminishing the crucial Jordan aquifer.
And this is all compounded by a persistent historical drought.
A crisis of modern memory, yes. As of January 2024, Iowa had experienced its 187th consecutive week of at least moderate drought.
Which the source notes is the longest continuous stretch since the 1950s.
Exactly. It affects 96% of the state's area. So this confluence of intensive resource extraction, concentrated livestock management, and climate instability makes conservation and water management the defining long-term challenge for the state.
To round out the geography section, let's talk about the weather, because if you live in Iowa, you are signing up for volatility. It sits squarely in a humid continental climate classified as DeFi.
Which is the classic definition of the Midwest. It's known for dramatic extremes of both heat and cold, and it can change rapidly. The average annual temperature in Des Moines is 50 degrees EMPA or 10 degrees C.
But that statistic is completely misleading because the variability is so extreme.
It really is, and they get a lot of severe weather, too.
Thunderstorms, tornadoes.
Significant severe weather. Iowa averages about 50 days of thunderstorm activity annually, which often leads to hail and powerful winds. The state averages 47 tornadoes per year, based on a 30-year average as of 2015, making storm preparedness a constant fact of life.
Let's put those extremes into context. What are the temperature records?
The all-time hottest temperature recorded was a searing 118 degrees F, 48 degrees E in Keokuk in 1934, right in the middle of the Dust Bowl era.
And the coldest.
A brutal neck 47 degrees F, neck 44 degrees C, recorded in Washta in 1912. That's a 165 degree swing.
And the precipitation pattern is very seasonal.
Highly seasonal. The driest months are typically midwinter, January or February, when the ground is often frozen. But June is consistently the wettest month, and that's driven by those frequent, powerful summer thunderstorms.
And that's right when the crops need it most.
Exactly. In Des Moines, for instance, over 2/3 of the annual average rainfall falls just between April and September.
Okay, so when people rely on that visual stereotype, they picture rural farmland. But the statistics tell us that while the geography is agricultural, the population is not.
The reality is that Iowa is predominantly urbanized. By the year 2000, 61% of the population lived in urban areas, and that's a trend that began in the early 20th century and has only intensified.
The population lives along the river corridors and in the growing central metro areas.
That's right. And this concentration leads to the classic Midwestern challenge, rural flight.
It's the central demographic tension. While urban counties Polk, which is Des Moines, Dallas, Johnson County, which is Iowa City, Lynn County with Cedar Rapids, and Scott County with Davenport continue to grow rapidly.
The rural counties are consistently declining, and this is compounded by something often called brain drain.
Let's unpack that term. In the context of Iowa, what does brain drain actually look like?
It's the exodus of the most highly skilled and educated young adults. These are often people who get a great education at state universities like Iowa or Iowa State, but then they leave the state seeking better employment opportunities or broader cultural amenities in larger non-Midwestern metros.
And Iowa had a serious problem with this in the 1990s.
It did. It had the second highest exodus rate for single educated young adults, second only to North Dakota. This demographic shift has deep, long-term political implications, which we will definitely address later.
But the sources indicate that some smaller, struggling communities have found a way to successfully push back against that population loss.
This is an excellent counter-narrative. Some smaller communities, often anchored by large-scale food processing facilities, have stabilized and, in some cases, even reversed that decline through the arrival of immigrant laborers.
Denison and Storm Lake are the two classic examples.
They are. The demographics in those towns have been dramatically diversified, and the local population base stabilized by families settling there for work in the meat packing and food processing industries.
And looking at the sheer pace of growth in the metro areas, it's all happening in that central corridor.
Absolutely. The Des Moines, West Des Moines Metro is the largest fully contained within the state. Council Bluffs, of course, is part of the larger Omaha, Nebraska metro.
But the growth rates in some of the Des Moines suburbs are staggering.
They really are, and they reflect national trends. Ankeny grew nearly 49% between 2010 and 2020. West Des Moines grew over 21%. These numbers just highlight where the state's economic vitality is concentrated.
So Iowa's European ancestry is clear, but let's look at the breakdown. German is the largest group, making up over a third of the state.
German ancestry accounts for 35.1%, followed by Irish at 13.5%, and English at 8.2%. And you can see this heritage reflected in these distinct cultural settlements across the state that are still very active today.
Such as the strong Dutch communities in Pella and Orange City.
Right, with their tulip festivals and distinct architecture.
The Norwegian heritage centered around Decorah, and the Czech and Slovak roots prominent in cities like Cedar Rapids and Iowa City.
These communities often maintain specific cultural traditions, festivals, and foodways that give the towns a really unique character.
Yes, and we also noted a significant historical inflection point for the African American population in the early 20th century, particularly driven by military necessity.
That was the establishment of the Colored Officers Training Camp at Fort Des Moines in 1917 during World War I.
A completely unique institution at the time.
It was. And this facility brought a significant and permanent increase in the African American population to the Des Moines area. Many of those families chose to remain after the war, contributing to the substantial black populations that grew in Des Moines, Waterloo, and Davenport in the early 21st century.
So that military history is a foundational part of the state's modern racial diversity.
It absolutely is. And looking at modern immigration, the source material shows that the diversification is now global.
Top origins in 2018 included Mexico, India, Vietnam, China, and Thailand.
And this influx is driving a major shift in the state's racial composition. The shift recorded between the 2010 and 2020 census is quite stark.
The white non-Hispanic population decreased from 91.3% to 82.7%.
Right. But the most telling number, illustrating a diversifying society, is the huge increase in the segment identifying as two or more races. That jumped from 1.8% to 5.6%.
That's a huge leap.
It is. And it reflects increasing intermarriage and a more complex understanding of identity, even in a state often perceived as homogenous.
Now for our aha moment on culture, language. If you were to blindfold a linguist and drop them into a conversation in Des Moines, they might expect uniform Midwestern English.
But linguists actually identify three distinct linguistic regions within the state where different dialects are colliding. It's a convergence zone for dialectology, and it's fascinating.
So in northern Iowa, around Sioux City and Waterloo, what do they speak?
They tend to speak North Central American English, which is shared with Minnesota and the Dakotas. This dialect sometimes features slightly more raised vowel sounds, a bit of that upper Midwest flavor.
And then central and southern Iowa,
Yeah.
including the major metropolitan areas like Des Moines and Iowa City.
They fall into the North Midland dialect, which is characterized by a slightly flatter, more generalized American accent. It's shared with central Illinois and Indiana.
But here is where it gets really interesting.
Hmm.
East central Iowa, encompassing Cedar Rapids and Dubuque, often exhibits traits of the northern city's vowel shift.
That's the dialect associated with cities further east, like Chicago and Buffalo, right?
Precisely. It's defined by a shifting of vowel sounds. For example, the A sound in a word like bag becomes higher and can sometimes be perceived as sounding like beg.
The fact that Iowa contains all three of these major dialect groups speaks to the complex, staggered history of its settlement. People came from the upper Midwest, the East Coast, and the Ohio Valley, and they brought their accents with them.
And beyond English, Spanish is the second most common language, with about 120,000 speakers, reflecting that recent immigration boom.
And German is still the third, spoken by about 17,000 people. And that includes the highly distinct Amana German and the Pennsylvania German used by the Amish communities.
And those German speakers have a dramatic and painful piece of history we have to recall.
The 1918 Babel Proclamation. During the height of anti-German sentiment in World War I, the state governor issued this proclamation which actually banned the speaking of German and all foreign languages in public, on the phone, and in schools and churches.
It was a severe measure of wartime cultural suppression.
It was. Shifting to religion, Iowans are predominantly Protestant at 60%, followed by Catholic at 18%. The Catholic Church is the largest single non-Protestant group, reflecting centuries of immigration patterns.
And historically, Iowa has been a magnet for groups seeking separation and unique communal life.
This is where the state's motto, "Our liberties we prize," really manifests in social structure. You see this with the Amish and Mennonites near Kelowna.
The German pietists who founded the National Historic Landmark Amana Colonies, which was a unique communal society for nearly a century.
And even the followers of Transcendental Meditation, who established the highly unique Maharishi Vedic city. It's a history rich with attempts to build specific, intentional communities.
Now we arrive at the biggest correction we can make to the popular image of Iowa. The stereotype is 100% farming. But the truth, supported by your sources, is that agriculture is actually a relatively small portion of the state's economy.
This is the essential takeaway we want you to have. Iowa is a diversified industrial power. While farming is central to its culture and its landscape, the largest sector of Iowa's economy, by a significant margin, is manufacturing.
Let's look at the numbers.
In 2003, manufacturing accounted for $20.8 billion, or 21% of the gross state product. For context, the direct production and sale of agricultural commodities contributed only about 3.5% of the gross state product in 2007.
That is a staggering contrast. So what exactly is Iowa manufacturing beyond just processing corn?
Well, food processing is the largest component because Iowa is a massive producer of raw inputs. Major national names like Tyson Foods, Quaker Oats, and General Mills have huge facilities there.
But the other critical sectors are heavy machinery, chemicals, and durable goods.
We're talking industrial output that touches global supply chains. Iowa is a production hub for serious, heavy industrial players.
John Deere, for example.
John Deere agricultural and construction equipment, 3M, Arconic, which makes aluminum products, Pella Corporation windows and doors, Vermeer Company industrial equipment, and Winnebago Industries RVs. They're all major employers and contributors.
So this diverse output of sophisticated machinery and processed goods is the real engine of the state.
It is. And this diversification provided economic resilience, which is crucial for stability, especially during national downturns.
The Great Recession in the late 2000s, for instance.
Absolutely. The breadth of their manufacturing base, combined with the strength of other sectors like finance and insurance, helped Iowa weather that recession far better than most states whose economies were heavily dependent on housing or the automotive sector.
And that stability was reflected in their credit rating.
It was. Iowa received the highest credit rating, AAA, from Standard & Poor's in 2009, a rating held by only a handful of U.S. states at the time.
Okay, let's concede that even if it's not the largest sector, agriculture is still a commodity powerhouse. Iowa remains a national leader.
It leads the nation. It often ranks first in the production of corn, soybeans, and ethanol. These commodities serve not just the U.S., but the world, fueling everything from livestock to alternative energy.
And of course, the hogs.
And the hogs. Iowa produces 30% of the nation's hogs, maintaining that striking ratio of 7 hogs for every person in the state.
Let's pause on that statistic one more time, 7-to-1. That density is just hard to fathom.
It underlines the sheer scale of the food production machine. And yet, not all agriculture is industrial scale. We need to highlight the growth in high-value, specialized farming.
Like organic farming.
Yes. The organic farming sector is growing rapidly. Iowa ranks 5th nationally in the total number of organic farms, and Northeast Iowa has become particularly recognized as a leader in local food system development, focusing on direct-to-consumer and regional sales.
And the importance of the Seed Savers Exchange near Decorah can't be overstated in the context of global food security.
The Seed Savers Exchange is a critical, nationally recognized, nonprofit seed bank. It is the largest non-governmental seed bank of its kind in the United States.
And it safeguards over 20,000 varieties of rare heirloom seeds.
In a world of increasing agricultural homogenization, preserving that genetic diversity is vital for future food stability. It makes this little corner of Iowa globally important.
Yeah, let's pivot to green energy, where Iowa isn't just leading, it's dominating in terms of reliance.
This is arguably the state's greatest modern success story. In 2019, wind power generated a monumental 42% of Iowa's total electrical energy.
42%. That is incredible, making it the highest percentage in the U.S. How did they achieve that level of saturation?
It's a combination of geography. They are centrally located and very windy and smart long-term policy. Iowa pioneered property tax exemptions for wind farms and was one of the earliest adopters of strong renewable energy standards.
They created a friendly business environment for it.
They did, and this encouraged major producers of turbines and components, like Acciona Energy and Siemens Energy, to set up facilities there, which in turn reinforces the manufacturing base. They built the infrastructure, and the investment followed.
And this massive domestically produced green energy base is now fueling the growth of the digital economy.
It's the perfect synergy. Iowa is rapidly transforming into a major data center hub precisely because it offers inexpensive, reliable, and increasingly green energy.
And tech giants need massive amounts of power for those server farms.
Exactly. Google has facilities in Council Bluffs and Cedar Rapids. Apple chose Waukee. Meta is in Altoona, and Microsoft has 6 data centers in West Des Moines.
So this high-tech digital economy growth, powered by green energy, provides a stunning contrast to the state's traditional agricultural image.
It really does. And beyond manufacturing and tech, the financial and insurance sector is also a critical, long-standing component of Iowa's economic strength.
A strong and mature sector.
Very. It hosts roughly 6,100 firms. Major national and international companies like Principal Financial Group, Nationwide Group, and Wells Fargo have significant operational centers here, contributing substantially to the state's stable economic footprint.
Finally, we need to cover the taxation quirk, which makes Iowa stand out nationally.
This is unusual. Iowa is famous for having one of the country's highest marginal corporate tax rates, reaching up to 12%.
Which sounds very high.
It does. However, there is a major benefit for residents that offsets income liability. Iowa is one of the very few states that allows residents to deduct their federal income taxes from their state income taxes.
So you can subtract what you paid to the federal government from your state income.
Correct. And this unique mechanism offers significant relief, particularly to middle and upper income wage earners, making the state income tax system less burdensome than that top marginal rate might initially suggest.
Okay, the final 2 sections deal with Iowa's influence on the national stage and its foundational yet often overlooked civil rights history. This is where the tension between tradition and progress truly manifests.
It is. And Iowa's national political significance is undeniable, driven entirely by one thing: the presidential caucuses.
That influential first presidential caucus in the country, held early in the election year, usually January or February, it gives Iowa voters this outsized national leverage.
And it forces candidates to engage in hyper-local retail politics. It elevates the concerns of Iowa citizens because candidates have to physically visit diners and town halls in every one of the 99 counties.
They're vetted on a personal level by a small, dedicated electorate.
And it forces candidates to hone their message and their organizational strength very early. It disproportionately focuses national media attention on a state that demographically does not represent the national average.
But while Iowa holds that powerful first-in-the-nation position, the state's internal politics have undergone a dramatic ideological shift in recent years.
That is the core modern political dynamic. Historically, Iowa was famously, politically balanced, a swing state.
Capable of going either Democratic or Republican in national elections.
Right. However, by 2024, state politics are largely dominated by the Republican Party.
And this shift is strongly linked to the demographic factors we dissected earlier.
The continuing exodus of younger, often more Democratic-leaning, educated people to urbanized states, combined with a significant ideological and demographic homogenization of rural voters remaining within the state.
And currently, Iowa formally recognizes 3 political parties: Republican, Democratic, and
the Libertarian Party, which gained official status in 2017.
Okay, now this is where we uncover the truly surprising history. A history of profound progressivism that utterly contradicts the state's often quiet national profile.
In the 19th century, Iowa was a dramatic vanguard for racial equality. It often set constitutional and legal precedents decades before the national consensus.
Let's detail these court cases and dates because their sequence and timing are absolutely stunning. Starting with slavery in 1839, just 3 years after the territory was organized.
In 1839, the Iowa Supreme Court delivered its first major decision in re the matter of Ralph.
What was the case about?
Ralph was a slave who was allowed to work in Iowa to earn money for his freedom. But his owner decided to reclaim him and had him arrested.
And the court?
The court ruled decisively, using the principle of habeas corpus, that no man in this territory can be deprived of his liberty. This decision explicitly rejected slavery on Iowa soil, declaring Ralph free the moment he stepped into Iowa.
And this happened a full 26 years before the Civil War ended, and the 13th Amendment was ratified.
An abolitionist legal stance established decades before the national standard. It's remarkable.
What about racial barriers to marriage?
Iowa ended racial barriers to marriage in 1851.
1851. That is over 100 years before the U.S. Supreme Court banned miscegenation statutes nationwide in the 1967 case Loving v. Virginia.
Again, just dramatically ahead of the curve.
And in education, Iowa predated the landmark Brown v. Board of Education by nearly a century.
In Clark v. the Board of Directors, in 1868, the Iowa Supreme Court ruled decisively against segregated, separate but equal schools.
85 years before the National Brown ruling.
Yes. And the ruling was powerful and far-reaching. It effectively ended legal segregation in Iowa schools by 1875. This quick, decisive judicial action established Iowa as an educational leader.
And public accommodations.
Same story. In 1873, the court ruled in Coger v. the Northwestern Union Packet Coast against racial discrimination in public accommodations.
This established the right of black citizens to equal access to steamboats and other public services.
And that was 91 years before the U.S. Supreme Court made the same decision nationally through the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
That is an incredible record of judicial progressivism in the 19th century. But the source material indicates that despite these early legal victories, discrimination continued through the mid-20th century. How did de facto discrimination persist if it was outlawed so early?
That is the crucial layer of complexity. The 1884 Iowa Civil Rights Act outlawed discrimination by businesses, but courts often applied the law too narrowly, creating loopholes that allowed discrimination to persist through indirect means.
So it wasn't until 1949, with the highly public case of State of Iowa v. Katz, that the state definitively closed those loopholes.
And this case was triggered when Edna Griffin was famously denied service at a Des Moines drugstore counter. Her successful legal challenge reaffirmed that racial discrimination in public businesses was unequivocally illegal under state law.
And full rights were finally codified under the 1965 Iowa Civil Rights Act.
Correct. Iowa was also a leader in women's rights in the mid-19th century.
The University of Iowa, founded in 1847, was the first public university in the U.S. to admit men and women equally.
And in 1869, Iowa was the first state to admit a woman to the practice of law when Arabella A. Mansfield passed the bar exam and was granted the right.
Although full suffrage wasn't achieved until the national 19th Amendment ratification in 1920, Iowa women did gain partial suffrage,
allowing them to vote on municipal and bond issues as early as 1894.
This incredible established legacy of protection and judicial activism makes the recent shifts regarding LGBTQ+ rights all the more jarring, because it represents a dramatic break from that history.
It creates a stark modern contradiction. In line with its progressive history, Iowa repealed laws criminalizing same-sex sexual activity way back in 1976.
Long before the national standard.
Right, and in 2009, the Iowa Supreme Court delivered the landmark Varnum v. Bryan decision, unanimously legalizing same-sex marriage.
This made Iowa the third state in the country and the first state in the Midwest to do so, continuing that vanguard tradition.
It did. But we see that historical impulse reversing today.
We do. The most recent data reveals a sharp pivot away from protection. In 2025, the Iowa legislature became the first U.S. state to remove gender identity protections from a state anti-discrimination law.
Protections that had been codified back in 2007. This is a dramatic reversal of the state's historical role as a civil rights pioneer, and it reflects the modern political and demographic shifts we discussed earlier.
Iowa's cultural landscape is also far richer than its rural image suggests, particularly its literary scene. Iowa City has an extraordinary global reputation, largely thanks to one famous institution.
We are talking about the Iowa Writers' Workshop at the University of Iowa, founded in 1936.
Its influence on American literature is massive. It's produced dozens of Pulitzer and Poet Laureate winners.
It has. And the workshop's reputation is so profound that Iowa City was named the first American city to be designated a city of literature by UNESCO, part of their Creative Cities network.
What other major cultural hallmarks stand out, especially outside the literary world?
You have the Amana Colonies, a National Historic Landmark comprised of 7 villages originally founded by German pietists who practiced communal living for decades. It's a living history museum of communal life and craftsmanship.
And in popular culture, you have the Clint Eastwood film The Bridges of Madison County, showcasing the state's picturesque rural scenery.
And then, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, the heavy metal band Slipknot, who are from Des Moines, named their second album, Iowa, reflecting a darker, more industrial sensibility of the state.
Let's hit some key attractions across the state for the listener. What should they know about central Iowa around the capital?
Central Iowa is Des Moines, home to the stunning Iowa State Capitol building and the historic Governor's Mansion, Terrace Hill. But the center of gravity for state culture is arguably the massive annual Iowa State Fair.
Right. And nearby, Ames hosts Iowa State University and the beautiful Ryman Gardens.
And just southwest, Madison County is famous for its historic covered bridges and the John Wayne Birthplace Museum in Winterset. The Meskwaki settlement near Tama also hosts a large annual powwow celebrating their unique heritage.
Moving east around Iowa City and the Quad Cities.
This is the intellectual corridor. You have the University of Iowa and the old Capitol building in Iowa City. In West Branch, you find the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library and Museum,
Davenport has the Fig Art Museum.
and hosts the annual Bix Beiderbecke Memorial Jazz Festival. And for something truly unique, there's the Iowa 80 truck stop near Walcott along Interstate 80. It's self-proclaimed as the world's largest, and it's massive, a city unto itself.
And western and northern Iowa offer that dramatic scenery we discussed earlier.
Western Iowa is defined by the spectacular Loess Hills, and Sioux City sits on the convergence of three rivers. Lamar's, which is in that metro area, is the self-proclaimed ice cream capital of the world, and home to Wells Enterprises, a massive ice cream manufacturer.
And northeast Iowa, the Driftless area.
It's home to the Effigy Mounds National Monument, which features the largest collection of animal-shaped prehistoric mounds globally. And of course, the iconic Field of Dreams baseball diamond is a major pilgrimage site in Dyersville.
Finally, let's talk sports. Iowa is a serious college sports state, boasting 4 NCAA Division I teams. The rivalry is fierce.
The biggest rivalry, of course, is the annual competition for the Cy-Hawk Trophy between the University of Iowa Hawkeyes in the Big Ten Conference and the Iowa State University Cyclones in the Big 12.
Those games dominate the state's attention.
They absolutely do. But their truest national dominance, where they have built a historical dynasty, is in wrestling.
Unquestionably, Iowa is the global epicenter of wrestling talent. The Iowa Hawkeyes and the Iowa State Cyclones have won a combined total of over 30 NCAA Division I team wrestling titles.
They are a national powerhouse responsible for training generations of Olympians and world champions.
And for motorsports fans, Iowa also has a strong racing presence.
Iowa Speedway in Newton hosts major auto racing championships like the IndyCar Series and NASCAR. And for dirt track fans, the Knoxville Raceway hosts the Knoxville Nationals, which is one of the classic sprint car racing events globally, drawing competitors and fans from around the world.
So after this deep dive into your sources, the most crucial takeaway for me is that Iowa is infinitely more complex than its farming image suggests.
Absolutely. We've analyzed a state with geological foundations spanning nearly 3 billion years, whose terrain ranges from wind-deposited Loess Hills to unglaciated mountainous terrain.
It's a state whose largest economic sector is manufacturing, not agriculture.
Right. And a state that is a massive leader in green energy, producing 42% of its electricity from wind, powering major hubs for data centers hosting Google, Apple, and Microsoft.
And perhaps most surprisingly, a state that was a constitutional and civil rights leader in the 19th century, pioneering anti-slavery law, desegregating schools, and banning racial barriers to marriage decades ahead of the rest of the nation.
The central tension defining the state today is precisely that clash. The persistence of a strong, rural, traditional identity against the rapid growth of diversified, high-tech urban centers and the associated political shifts. That is the core dynamic.
It is the constant friction of innovation meeting tradition, of global economy meeting local identity.
And the struggle to determine if Iowa's progressive legal history will endure.
Which leads us to a final provocative thought for you to consider. Given Iowa's established historical leadership in protecting marginalized groups, its early bans on slavery, its fight against segregated schools, and its early legalization of same-sex marriage, how will its current political environment, specifically being the first U.S. state to remove a protected class, gender identity, from state anti-discrimination law in 2025, shape its legacy and identity moving forward?
Is this a temporary detour or a permanent departure from its pioneering history?
That is a question worth exploring. That tension, that contrast between historical vanguard progressivism and modern legislative conservatism truly defines the Hawkeye state right now.
It certainly does.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Iowa. We'll see you next time.